This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word. So, welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Timothy Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum. Today is Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. I'm Lee Bortons, and once again, we welcome our esteemed curriculum developer, Stephanie Meter. So, thank you, team, for being here. So, Jennifer, you want to tell us about today's, or actually this month's shows and how today's fits in?
Yes, so we're winding down another one of our mini series. We've been looking at all things in the Classical Conversations Challenge A literature this month, which, as you know, is all beloved titles by us. So we have discussed A Door in the Wall by Margaret D'Angeli, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, Crispin, The Cross of Lead by Avi, and then today we are going to be delighting our way through The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis.
That's really great. I just enjoyed all of them, and I'm really excited about today. So you can access all of our past episodes on my YouTube station at Lee Bortons, as well as you can go to leebortons.com and see the 2023 archive, as well as the 2024 calendar, with links to the Classical Conversations books.com site if you want to purchase any of the books that we are talking about. And I'm really excited too, because next week we're going to get to talk about some Challenge B literature, starting with, well, we have actually a surprise guest that we'll be telling you about. So I'm not even going to say what we're doing because we're had a shuffle here. So but just look forward to having everybody continue with us through the summer as we also continue to enjoy books through the summer. So Jennifer, let's get started.
Okay, sounds good. Well, as I said, we are all delighted today because we know that the land of Narnia is beloved by all of us and by so many other families. And so, Lee, I almost don't have to ask you why this one is in the curriculum, but we do want to always answer that. So why this one, The Magician's Nephew from Chronicles of Narnia? Because we've already talked about them reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So why this one also?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of controversy about these two books among Lewis fans, and in the sense of which one should you read first. And different editions and publications have actually put The Magician's Nephew before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which he did write first. But The Magician's Nephew tells us how it all came to be. So it's kind of a prequel to the actual stories to the actual first story he wrote. And so we thought it was important because we're trying to help encourage the students to read the entire series, for them to read both of these books. And of course, it's just beloved fantasy, Christian fantasy, with so many elements of theology interwoven, where children get to meet Jesus, even when they don't know they are. And so it's really a special book for that reason.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely on the team. You should read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first. And having said that, I love The Magician's Nephew because we get to talk about some parallels with the creation story of our world, which is always nice to do with the students.
Good.
All right, so Tim, we've said that we read a couple things by C.S. Lewis, and he's pretty well known, really, for modern Christianity. But in addition to the two Narnia books that we read, our students read Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity, and one of his space trilogy books, the first one, Out of the Silent Planet. So why is Lewis so important to us here in the 21st century?
I know. Yeah, I love it that we read so much Lewis. Not just because he was a great author and a good thinker, but because the things that we read from him reflect kind of a wide variety of different kinds of things. And he's so competent with writing all sorts of literature, not just novels or allegory, but the different things that he wrote. So Lewis, he was born in a churched family, but didn't believe. He wasn't didn't follow Jesus until later in life, and he he said about himself at one point that he was very angry with God for not existing when he was 15. Um, and of course he was really profoundly impacted by World War I. He went to war in the trenches in Europe. He and so much of that generation, but he became friends with J.R.R. Tolkien and Dorothy Sayers and Owen Barfield and others that really sort of intellectually wooed him toward Christ, showing him that he didn't have to give up being a thinker to also be a believer, to be a Christian. And um, so then during World War II, he was invited to do talks on the BBC radio, and he went on and gave all these wonderful talks, all of which we don't have anymore because they were all recorded over, which is horrible. But thankfully, the Lord provided that many of them were collected into books. Transcripts of them were collected into some books. And so Mere Christianity is a product of many of those talks from the BBC radio broadcasts in World War II. Um, he was really profoundly influenced by G.K. Chesterton and George MacDonald in both his reasoning and also his use of the moral imagination and fantasy settings. And really he's loved because again he's written these fantasy style stories. You get a lot of theology and some really profound philosophy. He was a historian. He was really, really well versed in the academics of the Middle Ages, and he always wanted to be a great poet. He never quite managed, sadly. So and I love that too, that there is something that he was not great at that he wanted to do because he is so good at so many things. And I take courage that there's even great men have the things that they're not great at.
Mhm.
And he's just so beloved because he was able to take huge ideas and to boil them down into stories and words that are understandable. And he was so consistent with everything that he did. And little known fact, he died on the same day as John F. Kennedy. And so all the news stories about the assassination of President Kennedy overshadowed the passing of C.S. Lewis. So great man dying in the shadow of a great political event, sadly. But I was just reading an article this week about a thank you note that C.S. Lewis wrote to a fellow medieval historian who had him for dinner, and he wrote this in the same form as Beowulf is written, and with allusions to the things in Beowulf to delight his medievalist host. And this was just discovered just
Oh,
this
how
week.
fun.
So I thought that was really cool to see this little bit of humor and sort of insider haha that C.S. Lewis shared with a friend.
That's great. You touched on a lot of things that I think have made him important in my life, which I'm sure we can all relate to. One is, of course, his conversion story is moving and beautiful, and everyone should read his autobiography. And I grew up in a church tradition that was maybe a little less intellectual. And so my uncle got me a boxed set of the Narnia books for Christmas when I was 12. I still have it. And then he also, when I was a little bit older and ready for that, gave me some of Lewis's nonfiction works. And I've always appreciated that my uncle introduced those books into my life because I found a kindred spirit who liked to think big thoughts, but also loved Jesus. And so that was a really happy gift to my life.
That's great. So, I wanted to add that, there's so many stories about his life because so many people have written about him. But one that always resonates with me was Owen Barfield eventually had to take over Lewis's finances because he was so generous that at the end of the year, when he would fill out his taxes, he wouldn't have enough money to pay. And so Owen would, end up taking over his accounting. And he shares this story that one day Lewis was giving away money to a drunk laying on the streets, and Owen afterwards said, "Why do you do that? He's just going to spend it on drinking money." And Lewis said, "Well, that's what I was going to do." And so his understanding of the human condition and humility, that he was a sinner that had been saved, is just evident in everything he did, said, and all the relationships that he had. So he's just really down to earth, besides being an academic that fit well in an ivory tower.
Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
All right. Well, Stephanie, let's turn to The Magician's Nephew. We've talked a lot on this book club about Challenge A books that are more what we would call historical fiction. So they're either fictionalized tales of real people or they're realistic enough to be histories. And this is quite different than being in the real world. So what do you think it is about these fantasy stories like Narnia that makes them different from the other ones we've talked about?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. On the part of the author, it requires a special kind of storytelling to tell a good fantasy story. That craft of world building, knowing how to give enough details that your reader can get oriented, but not info dumping and being overwhelming. And authors can break the rules a little bit when they write fantasy. They're not bound by the physical laws of things. And then on the part of the reader, when you're reading fantasy, you have to have a little bit of willing suspension of disbelief, because a lot of things in the world are not going to follow our physical laws, or we're going to see things that don't exist before our eyes. So you have to suspend your disbelief there, and then also have a little bit of imagination to carry you. But what's so special, I think, about fantasy is that it lends itself so well to symbolism. So you can make figurative things literal. So if Jesus is called a lion in the Bible, you can make him a literal lion in fantasy. And then also in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when things in our lives are cold and barren, you can make a fantasy world actually be winter. And then when spring breaks through, we know that something is happening besides just warming up. We know it's rebirth. Hope has entered the world again. And so fantasy provides this really unique opportunity to make things literal in a way that ignites the imagination and asks us to look deeper.
Yeah, I love that. You've hit on one of my favorite aspects of fairy tales too, Stephanie, that if a character is bad, they usually have a physical blight that lets you know, right? The laws of the emotional world are followed in the physical world. So that's a nice aspect of fantasy stories. Nice. All right. So we've talked, because they are Challenge A books and we're talking about students who are, 12, 13. We've talked about this idea of coming of age. So did you see that here in The Magician's Nephew, Lee?
Yeah, they're in two different situations, and I'm sure there's more actually, since it is about two young children. But the one is, of course, Lewis's total in sympathy for the children and their plight during World War II and being sent out to the country and being displaced from their families. And just in this case, we also have a sick mother that's involved. And so he himself had a similar childhood. And so he gave them, the characters in this book, an opportunity to be children who had to do grown-up things, whether they wanted to or not. But then he throws in this thing that I find so especially delightful. He writes a story where the creator of the universe gives these children responsibilities he would give to nobody else. And that is true for all of our children.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I got goosebumps, Lee. So what other themes did you guys see as you were thinking about this story again, besides that coming of age idea? Did you have quick ones you wanted to share, Stephanie or Tim?
The nature of power is something that Gabe and I are talking a lot about, and I see that play out in The Magician's Nephew. Just right use of power and what power is and who has power and what they do with it. And we get to see power used in different ways, or squandered in different ways. The children have power, Uncle Andrew has power, Jadis has power, and they all use it very differently. And so I think it's a good opportunity for readers to think about what should have been done in these situations, and then what makes a person a good user of power, what makes a good leader.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's also sort of the man versus monster theme that's going on. in the beginning, Uncle Andrew is depicted as being quite monstrous. And it's only when they encounter Jadis that they realize how kind of pathetic Uncle Andrew is, and that he is not really, I mean, he does some monstrous things, but he's nothing like what a true monster is. And so you see, I think you have some of that perspective gained in the story through that theme.
Yeah, I was thinking about that while you're talking, Tim. There's so many other books we have in our curriculum that are similar in this way. Throughout the book, evil of the magician's nephew, evil is considered as silly. Like, why would you be that way when there's such wonderful things at your fingertips? And it reminded me of how, like in Amos Fortune Freeman, when he became enslaved, he was more bewildered by the fact that someone would want to enslave him and wouldn't respect freedom than he was angry that he was enslaved. He was more compassionate for his enslavers than for his own situation. And then also Betsy in The Hiding Place, when she's in that camp and she's going to die from it. And yet she's there praying for her captors because she knows they're hurt more than she is. And just to have that strength of God's insight, wisdom, and will, I mean, I don't have it, but it's approachable here in The Magician's Nephew, and children are given the opportunity to see making bad choices hurts that person more than it probably does you.
Yeah. And then in addition to the children that you mentioned, Lee, being given these responsibilities, there's also just this elevation of the cabbie and his
Oh,
and that to me has always been precious because it really is a manifestation in the fantasy world of God saying that those who are humbled will be exalted. And Lewis does a really precious job of elevating the humble but very good cabbie to a position that he deserves in this story. So
yeah, it makes you wish that they had been our Adam and Eve.
yeah. Yep.
That's great.
All right. Well, it's time for our break.
Okay, thank you. So we want to thank classicalconversationsbooks.com for sponsoring these conversations that we have around words aptly spoken. You can go to classicalconversationsbooks.com where the books discussed can be purchased, and we have the entire 2023 and 2024 archive and calendar of the books we will be reading and we have read, as well as links to them at Lee Borton's, my YouTube channel. So we really hope that you will join us. And I do remember next week we changed it. We're going to be reading, oh, now it just went out of my mind again. What are we reading next week?
In 2 weeks, I think we're doing Tanglewood Tales.
That's right. Next week we're at the conference, so we're
Yeah.
canceling that. The national conference is there. We hope you'll be there with us. If you miss it this year, look for it in 2025. And then after that, we'll be looking at Tanglewood Tales. And then we have a special guest, hopefully the following week, that will keep a secret till we have it all confirmed. But it's going to be a nice spring topics to talk about.
Yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully we'll have news on that soon. All right. Well, now is the time when we look at a close reading of a passage or two from the book. And we've talked a little bit here and elsewhere about cultivating the moral imagination of our children. One way we do that is have them discuss a should question. So they look at a decision that a character has made or an action that they have taken and ask if they should have done that thing. This is one way we practice cultivating our moral imagination, and we help them to write their essays in Challenge A. So we're going to look at a couple of times when Diggory is faced with the choice of whether or not to take the evil Jadis with him. So we're assigning ourselves a prompt today. A student would then go through the book and invent reasons either for and against the proposed action using the 5 common topics. And so we're only able to do a little bit of that thinking today, but it should be a good example. So Stephanie, you want to remind us who Jadis is and what has led up to this situation we're going to look
And
at?
even Diggory and Paul, did you say who they were, and I missed that?
Not yet.
Okay, go ahead and tell us.
All right. Yes. Okay. So a little bit of background on how the children get to the situation. Diggory and Polly are the children in question. And Diggory has been sent to the country to live with his Uncle Andrew. Diggory's mother is sick, and Polly is his neighbor. And they have stumbled upon some magic rings that Uncle Andrew has been developing that let you world hop. So Diggory and Polly, they find themselves world hopping, and they are in an ancient seeming red lit world now with no signs of life. They wander around into a building with a banquet hall where there are dozens of perfectly still, richly dressed guests, and the people are frozen in place. Some of them look very kind, some of them look very cruel, and at the head of the table is a debatably very beautiful, Diggory thinks she's beautiful, Polly does not, woman dressed even more elaborately than the others. She's a very powerful presence, even though she's frozen there. So Polly wants to leave the strange place. Diggory is fascinated by a bell that's sitting in the middle of the room. And on the stand is a little poem. Make your choice, adventurous stranger. Strike the bell and bide the danger. Or wonder till it drives you mad. What would have followed if you had? And Diggory is just obsessed with this instantly. He sees the trap that has been laid for him. He knows it's going to drive him crazy if he doesn't ring the bell. So he prevents Polly from leaving the world by touching her ring, and Diggory strikes the bell. And for a moment, it looks like it's okay, but then the scary, beautiful woman wakes up. She quickly reveals herself to be very confident, very strong, have magical powers, and she tells Diggory and Polly what happened to that world where they are. So apparently she, Jadis, had wanted the throne on which her sister rightfully sat, and Jadis waged war to try to get it. When, after both sides had fought long and hard, it became clear that Jadis was not going to win because both sides had decided not to use magic. That was an agreement they had come to. Jadis decides that she has to win the war at any cost, uses the deplorable word, which is going to destroy all living creatures except for the one who spoke the word. And she's previously enchanted the banquet hall to keep her safe through this and just have her slumber instead of be destroyed until someone strikes the bell. So she's laid this huge elaborate plot that will destroy her whole world except keep her safe until somebody rings the bell, which Diggory just did.
Wow. So many fun things in that. But we don't have all day, so we'll let Tim read us our first excerpt. We'll focus.
I love it that he calls it the deplorable word. That's such a so good. All right, so this is where we pick up the story. Now let us be going. It is cold here at the end of all the ages. Going where? Asked both the children. Where? Repeated Jadis in surprise. To your world, of course. Polly and Diggory looked at each other, aghast. Polly had disliked the queen from the first, and even Diggory, now that he had heard the story, felt that he had seen quite as much of her as he wanted. Certainly, she was not at all the sort of person one would like to take home. And if they did like, they didn't know how they could. What they wanted was to get away themselves, but Polly couldn't get at her ring, and of course, Diggory couldn't go without her. Diggory got very red in the face and stammered, "Oh, our world? I didn't know you wanted to go there." "What else were you sent for if not to fetch me?" asked Jadis. "I'm sure you wouldn't like our world at all," said Diggory. "It's not her sort of place, is it, Polly? It's very dull, not worth seeing, really." "It will soon be worth seeing when I rule it," answered the queen. "Oh, but you can't," said Diggory. "It's not like that. They wouldn't let you, you know." The queen gave a contemptuous smile. "Many great kings," he said, "thought they could stand against the house of Charn. But they all fell, and their very names are forgotten. Foolish boy, do you think that I, with my beauty and my magic, will not have your whole world at my feet before a year has passed? Prepare your incantations and take me there at once." "This is perfectly frightful," said Diggory to Polly. "Perhaps you fear for this uncle of yours," said Jadis. "But if he honors me duly, he shall keep his life and his throne. I am not coming to fight against him. He must be a very great magician if he has found out how to send you here. Is he king of your whole world or only part?" "He isn't king of anywhere," said Diggory. "You are lying," said the queen. "Does not magic always go with the royal blood? Who ever heard of common people being magicians? I can see the truth whether you speak it or not. Your uncle is the great king and the great enchanter of your world, and by his art he has seen the shadow of my face in some magic mirror or some enchanted pool. And for the love of my beauty, he has made a potent spell which shook your world to its foundations and sent you across the vast gulf between world and world to ask my favor and to bring me to him. Answer me. Is that not how it was? Well, not exactly, said Diggory. Not exactly, shouted Polly. Why, it's absolute bosh from beginning to end. Minion! Cried the queen, turning in rage upon Polly and seizing her hair at the very top of her head where it hurts most. But in so doing, she let go of both the children's hands. Now! Shouted Diggory. And quick! Shouted Polly. They plunged their left hands into their pockets. They did not even need to put their rings on. The moment they touched them, the whole of that dreary world vanished from their eyes. They were rushing upward, and a warm green light was growing nearer overhead.
Wow.
Very good reading.
Yeah, that was fun. It's almost hard to start discussing it after. You just kind of need to let it sit there for a minute, but we will. So, so what do you guys think? What are some reasons that Diggory should or should not take Jadis with him?
It's a little bit hard to answer because we know the ending of this story. All right.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to think of any reasons why he should, even not knowing the end. She does not seem like a good idea to anyone.
If he's read any fairy tales, he should have some strong reasons to say no.
Yes. Well, and we can see how she ruled her own world. Her track record is terrifying.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why he maybe should consider it, in the sense that I don't know that it's an altruistically good reason, but if she's willing to destroy every life on her planet, what's she willing to do to him and to Polly
Right.
to force the issue, to
Mhm.
make them take her with them?
I was thinking that too, Tim. Sometimes when we have a should question that seems so obvious to us, it's hard to think on the other side until we start thinking of reasons why we make mistakes. And so fear is one of the reasons we make mistakes. If you're afraid for your own life, then you're likely to make a decision to take her with you because
Mhm.
she seems like she might incinerate you.
Well, and one of the decisions, or and probably reasons he was interested at first, is that his mom is sick, and a good reason for him to bring her back could be that this witch could cure, or
Mhm.
this queen, whatever she is, could cure his mother. But she's shown her true colors too much for him to be thinking that that's going to happen.
Well, we could also say that since she has done what she's done to her world, maybe she will not do that again because she knows what it feels like to be totally without subjects. Like, she's been frozen for a long time. She's probably bored. She'd probably like to rule a world with live people in it. So she's not going to, at least, destroy or freeze the other world, probably.
The other thing Lewis would pointed out was, because he was a medievalist, is what do you mean you don't have a lot of kings? Because that's what they would have called mayors and owners of fiefdoms back, during the Middle Ages. And so but he's kind of pointing out that after World War I in modern England, no one thinks about all the possible kings because of the nation states. And yet she thinks she's going to be the one to rule over all of them.
Yeah, and it may be that Diggory really, I mean, you could argue that he really does believe, well, there's no way that anyone's going to let her get away with that. So,
Mhm.
So I'm trying to think with the common topics. So like defining her terms about king and power. And she defines her terms, the kings are the royal bloods are the ones that have the ability to enchant people and to have power. And so that's a, it's a comparison of today's people that are in charge think that they have power over the weather and all of our health and things
Yeah.
like that.
And I think too, like, though Diggory in this very like split second that he's trying to make a choice might not think this far out, but using the common topic of relationship, what are the possible consequences of this choice? And one of them that's maybe could be viewed as a positive is look, if Uncle Andrew wants to muck about with things he doesn't understand, maybe Uncle Andrew deserves to get a Jadis delivered on his doorstep to come and show him what's what a real magician looks like.
Yeah. What happens when you mess with natural things? Yeah, we kind of, so you talked about definitionally with tell me yours again. I want to kind of categorize for a second.
Oh, well, just like power and kings and magic and how those go together.
Was ruling, and Tim touched on relationship with consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephanie and I think we were both looking at comparison, but you tell me if yours was different. Just that idea of this is a recognizable type. So you're comparing to other situations and stories.
Yeah. And maybe relationship a little bit. We've already she's seen the cause and effect of the way she ruled her current world. So maybe she will make a different choice in the next world.
That would be a happy thought.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's also a pretty compelling argument for she will probably continue in the way that she has. So put that on both categories.
Yeah, which is good for the kids to do, and then they can always sort and decide later. And then I think you touched on circumstance with talking about his mother's illness, that those are the things happening in his world. So not right here in Narnia, but there are things outside of that situation.
Yeah, their danger here is also circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of possible versus impossible in this place. You know, possibly Jadis could kill them if they don't take her. It's currently impossible for them to get home because they can't reach their rings. She's holding them in a way that keeps them there. And then when things shift a little bit, it then becomes possible for them to touch their rings, and they think, okay, maybe we're going to get away with this and not take her with us.
Yeah. And one other thing is, I mean, she describes that this world is ending, right? It's at its very, very end. And so to leave her here is to put her to death. Right?
Yeah.
She will die if they leave her here.
Yeah.
That's a pretty compelling moral argument that they have to wrestle with.
I was looking, we always somehow leave off testimony. I'm not sure why, but I was looking at when you got to love when Polly says shouts. Let me say that. She does not say it. She shouts, not exactly why. It's absolute bosh from beginning to end. I always love that when one of the characters has the common sense in the circumstance.
Yes.
So her testimony was literally quite loud in that moment.
Bosh is a good word too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and when we read the word minion, Tim, when you cried the queen, minion cried the queen, it reminded me that once again, there's always connections in these fantasies and fairy tales and myths and stories, because that whole Minion movie and that character, which I've never seen them, so I don't really quite know what they are. We have a fire hydrant that's painted like one in our neighborhood, and that's about my connection. But it's what sounds like an old word is new again, and that's what makes these books classics. So even the circumstance of who's reading the books about Diggory and Polly, they're welcomed into it.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. All right. Well, Stephanie, for the sake of time, I think since we hit all 5 common topics, is everyone good if we move on to our next scene from the book? You guys are good to go. All right. So Stephanie, you want to pick up where we left off?
Sure. Let go, screamed Polly. I'm not touching you, said Diggory. Then their heads came up out of the pool, and once more the sunny quietness of the wood between the worlds was all about them, and it seemed richer and warmer and more peaceful than ever after the staleness and ruin of the place they had just left. I think that if they had been given the chance, they would have forgotten who they were and where they came from, and would have lain down and enjoyed themselves, half asleep, listening to the growing of the trees. But this time there was something that kept them as wide awake as possible, for as soon as they had got out onto the grass, they found that they were not alone. The queen, or the witch, whichever you like to call her, had come up with them, holding fast by Polly's hair. That was why Polly had been shouting, "Let go." This proved, by the way, another thing about the rings, which Uncle Andrew hadn't told Diggory because he didn't know it himself. In order to jump from world to world by using one of those rings, you don't need to be wearing or touching it yourself. It is enough if you are touching someone who is touching it. And that way they work like a magnet, and everyone knows that if you pick up a pin with a magnet, any other pins which is touching the first pin will come too. Now that they saw her in the wood, Queen Jadis looked different. She was much paler than she had been, so pale that hardly any of her beauty was left. And she was stooped and seemed to be finding it hard to breathe, as if the air of that place stifled her. Neither of the children felt in the least afraid of her now. Let go of my hair, said Polly. What do you mean by it? Here, let go of her hair at once, said Diggory. They both turned and struggled with her. They were stronger than she, and in a few seconds they had forced her to let go. She reeled back, panting, and there was a look of terror in her eyes. Quick, Diggory, said Polly, change rings and into the home pool. Help, help, mercy, cried the witch in a faint voice, staggering after them. Take me with you. You cannot mean to leave me in this horrible place. It is killing me. It's a reason of state, said Polly spitefully, like when you killed all those people in your own world. Do be quick, Diggory. They had put on their green rings, but Diggory said, Oh, bother, what are we to do? He couldn't help feeling a little sorry for the queen. Oh, don't be such an ass, said Polly. 10 to 1 she's only shamming. Do come on. And then both children plunged into the home pool. It's a good thing we made that mark, thought Polly. But as they jumped, Diggory felt a large cold finger and thumb had caught him by the ear. And as they sank down and the confused shapes of our own world began to appear, the grip of that finger and thumb grew stronger. The witch was apparently recovering her strength. Diggory struggled and kicked, but it was not of the least use. In a moment, they found themselves in Uncle Andrew's study, and there was Uncle Andrew himself, staring at the wonderful creature that Diggory had brought back from beyond the world.
Yeah. So what has changed that that might make our little chart that we were mentally making change?
This is such a brilliant passage for you to have picked out, Jennifer, or Tim, whichever you did it, because it does contrast the shouldn't versus now. Then he's stumbling with the should, and now he's got some hindsight to it all. Just the comparison of the witch being such fearsome power to such diminished, constitution so quickly.
Yeah, and the fact that she doesn't just say help, she says mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And mercy, having mercy on someone is an important that goes in the affirmative column for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, especially for somebody who just said the deplorable word and wiped out her country.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how Polly, I mean, she makes an allusion to authority, even though it's not a specific appeal to authority, right? It's a reason of state, said Polly, right? She's referencing sort of she's sort of throwing Jadis's prior words back at her, but also referring to the fact that even here, the choice to leave Jadis to die is something perhaps that is not a personal decision, but is something having to do with justice.
Or just the safety of society, too. It's not just Jadis's life at stake, potentially. They see how dangerous she can be if they bring her home.
Yeah, and you see that conflict of justice and mercy in so many, well, so much of life, and also some of the other stories that we read, and it's important to figure out. There's no, I don't think there's a blanket statement that lets you know which one is right. So I think the fact that you had us look at circumstance, Tim, really matters, because whether to go with one or the other of those, the circumstances matter.
I even wonder about the author's circumstance, because this would have been written during the time when Lewis was talking about some rings. And if you notice in both these situations, when the White Witch makes her way through with them, they don't make that choice. She snags on to them at the last minute. So whether they should or shouldn't becomes irrelevant, because there's forces beyond our own decisions that make things happen in this world. And that's just like when Gollum bit off Frodo's finger, and Gollum made the decision to destroy the ring, not Frodo. And so I can just see the two men having their beers at the Eagle and Child and arguing over these kind of stories and how to best, because they didn't like each other's writings. So how to best work that out.
I was thinking about that too, Lee, because Frodo is told to have mercy and pity on Gollum versus dispensing justice. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and in both of these situations, Diggory and even more Polly choose to leave. They do make the choice to leave Jadis to die in both situations, and fail to do so, not because of their choice, right, but because of Jadis's quick grabbing of them both. And again, Lewis, one of his brilliant things, there's pieces of this that are so foreign, they're so otherworldly, like the description of Charn or this wood between the worlds that's weird and different. And yet here you've got Jadis grabbing Diggory's ear, and any of us who had a grandmother who chose that as the way of getting our attention when we were misbehaving know exactly what he's talking about and how that feels, and it's so relatable.
Yeah. I also love the way he brilliantly just drops little almost inconsequential sentences in, like when he says, "This proof, by the way, another thing about the rings which Uncle Andrew hadn't told Diggory because he didn't know it himself." And there's this, as Lewis wrote a lot about scientists and the sort of magic power they were wielding in the 20th century. And they were playing with things that they did not know themselves. That's a nice little warning thrown in there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure the deplorable world comes from Lewis and Tolkien's arguments, and this is where they did agree that nuclear power was not going to be our friend when it came to war. And so the description of Jadis's home is similar to the destruction of Sauron's area and the various places that Tolkien wrote about that were just obliterated.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think one thing
Yeah.
that's important in thinking about, well, and Tim, if you were going to add to that, this is slightly a different topic.
Go
so
ahead, Stephanie.
We're talking about whether they should have taken Jadis or not, and the fact that Jadis took matters into her own hands and the children didn't get to make the choice. They put themselves in the situation of not being able to make the choice, or at least Diggory did, by striking the bell. So there was that choice in the beginning, and that's important for all of us to think about too, that you do make choices, but when you're making choices, then you are narrowing the options that are going to be available to you later. So if you choose to strike the bell, you may not get a choice of, should I bring this evil witch into my world or not? Like, you made this choice and now she's going to take over, and that can be scary.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis was so good at having the children feel a sense of, I'm about to do something wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway,
Yes.
right? Without being preachy. It was
Yeah.
just naturally how a kid would think and react.
But I sympathize with Diggory so much. I absolutely cannot tell you that I wouldn't have struck the bell. I mean, because he's right. Like, or wonder till it drives you mad, what would have happened if you had? Yes, that's what would have happened to me. I mean, I would have just driven myself crazy. So I like to think I would have been Polly, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I like that idea of like, sort of the chain of causation is a really powerful thing and important for students and adults to think about, right? It would be easy for Diggory to say, well, I didn't bring Jadis with me. She tagged along, right? She grabbed on. I didn't choose to save her. Yeah, but for you ringing the bell, Jadis couldn't have come into London. And of course, then he can say, well, yeah, but it was Uncle Andrew who sent us, and so it's his fault, right? There's this, and we always do that. We try to shift blame back onto somebody else, but to understand that our actions, even one or two times removed, are still part of the culpability or the chain of causation.
Like it was the woman's fault. No, it's the snake's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, human nature right there.
Or Adam saying, "The woman you gave me." It's, yeah. Oh, well, good. Well, we sadly, I think, are absolutely out of time. As usual, we just have to leave you guys in the middle of this conversation and let you go have more conversations about The Magician's Nephew with your children and your family. It will make for a lovely dinner time conversation.
And it's like all the books we read, they are a really good adult read at the beach or at your favorite rocking chair, and to your grandchildren, start reading them. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.